mic on? Can you all hear me? Yes, yes, there we go. Okay, I feel a low energy. Have we had enough coffee this morning? Yeah? Okay, there's going to be a break after this, so you only have to make it through this, and then you'll be able to recaffeinate. Okay. So I'm Arielle. I already had an introduction, so I don't need to give you another one. But today, we're going to be talking about practicing Agile in a roadmap culture. Great. So this is going to be a little interactive, so I'm pre-warning you. How many of you in this audience, how many of you have attended a workshop or read a book or had a boss that was like, Agile is the future. Like, you need to be doing everything Agile. I want to see some hands. Okay, perfect. Now, how many of you had that same boss then go, can you please give me your product roadmap? Okay, how many of you are not raising your hand because you're sitting next to your boss? Or are that boss? Okay, well, today we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do both. So it seems like there's this perceived tension between roadmaps and Agile, between long-term planning and short-term user reaction. But it's really just a perceived tension. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to tell you a story, right? Because sometimes it's about stepping back from our product people lives and really remembering that this problem probably exists in the real world too, right? So let's talk about that. When I was in university, I was a waitress at a diner. Specifically, if you've seen Knocked Up, that diner. So, can you imagine if I'd come into work every day and the chef would be like, tell me everything everyone's going to order today. I need everything. Like, obviously, there is no way that I would be able to do that. But this is sort of how we kind of feel like as product managers when someone asks for our roadmap. But in the same breath, the chef needs to be able to make a schedule for staff, order ingredients, prep the food, right? And if he doesn't have the information he needs to be able to do that, how am I supposed to be able to fulfill my future customers' orders? So this tension, it exists everywhere. So when we talk about it, and we talk about this tension, what we're saying is that he shouldn't have the information he needs to be able to do his job. And obviously, obviously he needs that, but obviously I want to be able to create the space in which I can react to my customer orders. So why do we feel like there's this tension? So I believe it's for a couple of reasons, but one of them is very specifically because roadmaps feel like time. They feel very linear. And when we work in Agile, that's not how we think. We don't think in a calendar. And so what happens is that we have this thing that someone wants us to produce that feels like dates. And we're like, no. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about what I'm doing for this sprint, maybe next sprint, right? And so this creates this tension between the fact that I'm really focused on reaction to my customers and my users and not about what the future, like the long-term future, looks like. Roadmaps also tend to historically be very deliverable or output focused. We want this many cars by this many dates, or this many that by this many dates. And that's obviously also not how we work when we work in Agile. And the second you start putting things down into these kind of things that feel like a linear thing, it seems like we have done this and it's done. And then we move to the next thing, right? We did it, great. We did it, great. Yeah, okay. Obviously, that's not what we're trying to do in Agile. So how do we take what we want to show in this kind of form that people are looking for, but the iterative nature of Agile, and are more outcome focused, are more goal focused. So I'm going to give you some tips that you can try to put into immediate action in your organization and your team. So we're going to go through some examples, and this is by no means everything that's out there. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of an asterisk, right? You hear people say, I follow the X company model. We follow the thing that this team from this famous organization uses. If you are not that team on that organization, why are you following that model? You can be inspired by that model. Absolutely. You can learn from it. It can be a starting point, but every team and every organization is different. Remember, people over processes. You don't need to follow some very specific thing to be successful. So these should be viewed as inspiration and starting points. So a good option is a user story map. This probably fits really well into the workflow that you already have. Most of you are product managers or work in products, so you love Post-it notes. You probably have something that actually looks like this, right? So this is really nice. You make it digital. You can actually create something that implies what you're working on now and what you might be thinking about in the future by creating some increments. But it is not a feature order. This is not a feature order. And if we think about the story about me being a waitress, right? We do have some things that help limit what we're doing, right? We had, in that example, we have things like a menu, which limits our scope. And we probably have some external information, like it's a hot day, so maybe we don't need so much soup. We have some historical data. And this kind of stuff can inform these to help us create these roadmaps, right? So this thing, you have some data that informs this. It allows you to create some semblance of why you're doing something now and why you're probably going to do something later. But again, this is a tool that allows you to communicate what you're working on to your leadership team and something that allows you to align with your team, but it is not a feature order. So in that same vein, we have something called the now, next, later. Now, this works well because it starts feeling a little bit more linear, right? So when people say, I want a roadmap, and you give them the user story map, maybe they're like, yeah, but this isn't a roadmap. Okay, we're using a loose definition of roadmap here. This one feels a little bit more like it's probably what they're looking for. And so if you have an organization where you need to do something like that, this is a great one. It shows what are we working on, what do we think we'll probably be working on next, and then what do we think is coming after that, right? Again, you can have some loose organization, but this is still very outcome focused. This is not a feature order. But this will give you a tool to align with your team and your leadership, but not a feature order. So then themes. So actually let's do another show of hands. How many of you are in an organization where you love OKRs? Okay, this one is for you. So this is great, right? It talks about what you're trying to accomplish as an org. It puts your quarterly OKRs there. And then you can talk about how you're prioritizing to influence those OKRs. This feels very roadmappy, right? Very roadmappy. However, it is not we are delivering X, Y, Z on these dates. So it gives you that space where you can iterate and learn. And it gives you the ability to create alignment and transparency into your work with both your leadership team and your actual working day-to-day product team. And you can do that in these spaces around these quarters and kind of show what's coming. But again, not a feature order. So here's an example from my actual working life. So this is a redacted for privacy. But this is one that I've actually used. Now, you'll see that there's a date up there. We're going to come back to that. But what you can see is I have some quarters up here. I talk about what I'm kind of focusing on in those quarters. Now, what we generally see, we talk a lot when we talk about Agile, is that how are we going to solve these problems, and we're focusing a lot on solving these problems. But the reality is that a lot of the work that we do is actually not just around trying to solve problems and trying to make our users' lives easier, better, simpler, right? A lot of it is, I need to set up security. I need to have like a really solid data model. And these things don't necessarily need to happen in that same way, right? So some of these are pretty predefined, right? I know as an organization, any product I build needs to be able to use my SSO and do all these kinds of things. You probably have some similar needs somewhere. It has to be GDPR compliant. I have to go through 6 layers of legal review. I have to do all these other stuff, right? So I can put those on there because I know that they are well defined and they need to be done. So you can have some of that on there. And then you'll see I have some things that are very general. So I have on here community manager capabilities, community member capabilities. What does that mean? That's where I get to do my agile thing to solve that. That says this is where I focus on that user and solving their problems. And you can just know that this is generally when that's going to happen. But I'm not telling you what that looks like because I will do continuous development and discovery to be able to solve this. And that is not what you need. That's not even the level of detail in general that my executive team needs. They need this level. This is when I focus on these people. So this is a great version. And this is one that I found lots of success with. This works really well, though, in organizations that plan quarterly. So here's another type of roadmap that you can use. This one is a goals or outcomes focus. Again, you'll see something that feels more time-based, that feels like the calendar that your leadership team is probably looking for, but is still not a feature order, right? And this also is nice because it reminds people why you're doing stuff, and part of that is because it reinforces it through your metrics of success. So again, it's not, we need to do this feature. It's, this is the thing that we care about influencing, and these are the things we think might help us influence that, but we don't know, and this is where we create our agile cycles, right? So we've seen quite a few examples. Not everything is going to work for everybody, for every team, for every organization, right? And it shouldn't. It shouldn't. These should be inspirations and starting points. So that brings me to something that is often overlooked when we talk about this. Feedback is your friend. I talk about this being a starting point. It is a starting point. So we talked about, I mentioned that date that you saw on my roadmap where it said July 2018. That is because, one, I'm constantly refining my process depending on what team and what product I'm working on. And I do that by getting feedback from both the team, my stakeholders, and my leadership. And we often forget this point because we're so focused on trying to deliver that we don't take a moment to step back and actually talk to the people that we're working with to say, how can we do what we do even better? Your process is not precious. It is not sacred. Refine, change, test. In the same way that you iterate your products, iterate your process. It should work for you. Now, one of the things we talk about when we talk about roadmaps is the fact that they're actually a communication and an alignment device. This is why people like them. This is why your team wants them. They want to know so that they can all feel like we're on the same page. So there are other ways to do that, and let's not forget about them. I'm a big fan of open and advertised demos. If you do sprint demos in your organization or something that feels like a sprint demo, like talk about your work, invite people, showcase it. When people are invested in what you're doing and they see and they feel like they're part of the process, they will give you trusted space to be able to iterate and solve the problems on your own. Don't forget that as a product manager, in some ways we're also marketing people, right? Internal marketing people. Create a newsletter, a Slack channel, whatever it is for your product, and talk about the work that you and your team are doing. There are other ways to build transparency, alignment, and create communication, and you should take advantage of all of them, not just use roadmaps. And retrospectives. How many of you actually do your retrospectives? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. This is something that is often overlooked and often only done when things go wrong. So I will tell you, put them on a regular cadence. However you need to do them, if you want to do them at the end of every sprint, at the end of every quarter, whatever, do them for everything and do them often. Again, the process does not have to be precious. Find what works for your team. As long as you're doing them, that's all that matters. But you should take a moment, just like you go and you test with your front-facing users about trying to make your product better, you should be testing with yourself how you can make your process better. And if you don't actually step back and ask your users, in this case, your team and your stakeholders, what would work better for them, then you're missing a key opportunity. So when it comes to roadmaps, I tend to do quarterly reviews. Most of the organization I have worked in have all had quarterly OKRs or goals or something like that. So this is why I do that cadence. Depending on your organization, do this however you want. But you saw that date on my map. That was when I had last updated it. It changes all the time. Because I learn. It should change. I learn as we go. This is what makes Agile so powerful, is that you have this option of learning. And so you should be reflecting that in your communication tools. And then, even though it always feels like you don't want to do this, send a nice big recap that just talks about what your team has learned, about its own process, and what you've delivered, and why you delivered those things. Don't send it on a Friday afternoon. Send it nice and early on like a Monday mid-morning so that people actually read it. Again, roadmaps are just one tool for alignment and communication. So make sure that you're using all of the tools in your toolbox. And we've talked a lot about how to align and around like your organization, your team. But also, don't forget to ask your users, right? It's really easy to focus so much on creating these outputs. And what we're trying to do is step back and have a space where we can really focus on outcomes. And part of that is around making sure that we actually test and iterate. And when I say test, I mean, specifically here, I mean quantitative. And if you should also be doing qualitative user feedback, right? And you can build that as well into your roadmap of saying, if anybody's familiar with continuous discovery and development or a lot of other, like there's so many thought processes out here. Again, you make your own, and but make sure you build those into your roadmap saying, this is where we learn, this is where we implement, right? But this is really, really important. I find that as product teams tend to mature, we focus so much on creating alignment in our own teams and our own organizations that sometimes we actually forget to do some of the basics. So make sure to spend time on that. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit. I'm a fast speaker. And I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions. For the product managers in the audience, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see in trying to implement some of these tactics within your organization? I'm not going to answer this question for you, but I really want you to think about this, right? Because if you can think about what's standing in your way, then you can actually have a conversation about it. And for leadership in the audience, I want to think about how you can create a space to actually allow your product managers to experiment with their processes, right? Because this is time. It takes time. You know, dictatorships are fast. It's true. And what we're trying to do is actually create a space where we can all work together. And transparency and alignment needs to be intentional, and intent takes time. So if you're a leadership in the audience, how can you create the space to allow these teams and your product managers to actually say, I'm going to try this, and we're going to use it for a quarter, 6 weeks, whatever it is, and it could change. Don't fall in love. It could change. And so with that, I'll be in the talk shop afterwards with Ash, and grab some coffee and come join us.